John. That was outstanding. Can we thank him one more time for jumping off the bus to be here with us? Thank you, John. John, we love your music here. God has used it today, and I know that as you go, he'll keep using it. And know that you literally have a voice that God is using in huge ways. So thank you for sharing with us, man. All right. So John, like Josh said, literally got off the bus on the side of the road, jumped on. I don't think he brought his CDs with him. But there is this thing called the World Wide Web, and if you go on it, you'll find a place like iTunes. Download his music, and don't get cheap on us and just get the one song, two songs he played today. Get the whole album. It's $9.99. You can do that. Because if you just get the one or two, you're going to miss all the other amazing songs that he writes that they play on Air One and K-Love and every station that plays good music. So John, that was great, man. He'll be back at the end of the morning. So open your Bibles to the book of Mark, chapter 10. And 2 weeks ago, we started a series on spiritual development, spiritual formation. And we started talking about how does God form and shape us spiritually? How do we live differently? What are the things we need to value? And I said last week that there are 5 areas of our lives, 5 areas of the human personality that God shapes us and develops us in. And here's a list. And over the next few weeks, we're going to take these one at a time. God made us, last week we talked about that we are relational people, and God uses other people to grow us. We are also made as emotional people with the ability to love people and to love God. We also have this intellectual ability to reason and understand. God gave us a mind. We'll talk about growing a Christian mind. And then there's an ethical component to our spirituality, and that we know right from wrong. We know justice from injustice. We'll talk about that. But today I want to take on the second one there, and that we have a physical body, and there's a connection between our physical lives and our spiritual life. I don't think we always think that there's a connection between our physical existence and our spiritual self, but there is. The Bible writers and Jesus keep putting the two together. Writers like Paul uses words like the flesh, but Jesus often talks about the things that we do physically as impacting our spiritual lives. So now when we talk about the physical aspect of our spirituality, I could talk about it in several ways. I could talk about it like in issues of morality. A few weeks ago, we talked about your body is a temple, so we could talk about it in that sense. I want to talk about the physical aspect of our spirituality in a different way today. I want to talk about literally our physical possessions. Maybe, to put it bluntly, money and possessions, and how what we own and what we value has a direct impact on our spiritual formation and how we grow and how close we can be to God. We often don't think of our spirituality in those terms, but Jesus, like I said, keeps making that connection. As I talk about possessions, stuff, things, and money, some of you are squirming, but don't. In most churches, I think people talk about those things to create guilt. I talk about it this morning because I want you to know, if you're new here especially, that you've entered into a culture of extreme generosity. That's really the best way I can describe the culture of the Grove. I've been a Christian my whole life. I've been in a lot of churches, a lot of places. I've never been among such a generous people as the people I've gotten to know at the Grove. I mean that. When I say that, I think about the things that happened even just this last week. My wife and I were talking to a mother of a high schooler, and she said, Palmer, this last week my son made us come to church. They were coming anyway, but he set his alarm, got up. He said, I'm coming to church this week with you. I need to sit with you so I can tithe. That's what he said. You know, what high schooler does that? We have a need in our children's ministry right now, and a couple heard about it. And so what happened is they contacted Jennifer, our children's pastor, and they told Jennifer, we can't, because of our work schedules, commit to serving on Sundays, but we hear that you have these new kids' rooms with no cabinets. We heard something like Palmer got so cheap, he took the cabinets out of the budget, and that's true. We took them out. But Jennifer needs a place to put the goldfish and the crayons and everything. And so this couple says, we're bringing brand new cabinets for every room in our children's building. That's one generous couple. We can applaud that. We really can. Thank you. Something that practical. When I say that you have stepped into a culture of generosity, I think about Sebastian. Sebastian, he's a little older now, but when he was 8 years old, he came in my office. I know he was 8 because he said it was his birthday. And he had a bag, big old bag full of change, a Ziploc bag. And I said, Sebastian, what's that for? And he said, well, it's for mosquito nets in Africa. You see, our kids here collect change for mosquito nets. And for every $10, we can buy one mosquito net for a kid in Africa. And we do that, and we hang them in their huts. Anyway, Sebastian said, because it's my 8th birthday, and he's holding up this big, giant bag of change, he says, I brought you $108. And then, I gave him some knuckles and thanked him. And then when he was leaving, he stopped at the door, and he turned back, and he said, when I turn 9 next year, like I can do the math, next year, when I turn 9, he says, I'm bringing $109. That's what he said. Because we live in this culture of generosity. I see it every Thanksgiving. If you haven't been here on a Thanksgiving yet, you've missed out. On Thanksgiving, we put hundreds of boxes, empty cardboard boxes in our lobby with a shopping list for a Thanksgiving dinner, including a fresh turkey for a family that has a need in Chandler. And so what I've learned now is that we run out of those boxes. And so I hear that our volunteers on Sunday, they get here early and they hide the boxes around the church so people won't take theirs and they won't miss out on being generous. I say we're a generous church because like on Friday, I ran into Greg at a restaurant, and Greg and I were talking again about something he wants to do in Africa. You see, Greg is in real estate, and he says, a friend of mine and they met with Paul Gunther and me to say they want to do something they call a house for a home. And their idea is that every time a house is sold by one of the realtors that they know, they want to challenge the buyer and the seller, and the buying agent and the selling agent, and the mortgage broker and the title company to all participate and all give, so that with a sale of that one house in America, we can build a home for a single mother in Africa who may be a single because of AIDS, or a widow because of AIDS. And when I hear that, I go, wow, we really are a generous church. I love hearing that. By the way, my favorite story of generosity was a few Christmases ago when we had a young couple here. They had their second baby, but they only had one car. And while the husband was working and his wife was at home with the kids, you can't really be a good mother if you don't have a car. And she was stranded all the time. So at Christmas, another couple at the Grove I don't know where they got it, bought it somewhere, took a Suburban over to their driveway and put a red ribbon on it on Christmas Eve. And then they hid behind the bushes, they said, and waited for this couple to come back from the Grove Christmas Eve service. And then they said, we got to watch from behind the bushes while they danced around the car after they read the note that said, Merry Christmas, the car is for you. Do you see why I say you've stepped into a culture of extreme generosity here? And sometimes we think that the things that I own, my possessions, is different or separate from my spiritual condition, and it's not that way. I want you to look at a story with me where Jesus connects the idea of what we own has a direct impact on our spirituality. And so turn to Mark chapter 10, and I want to start reading in verse 17. A man came up to Jesus and fell on his knees before him. Good teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And moving down to verse 19, Jesus said, you know the commandments. And then Jesus lists them. Verse 20, teacher, he declared, all these things that I've kept since I was a boy. And Jesus looked at him and he loved him. One thing you lack, he said. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. At this, the man's face fell, and he went away sad because he had great wealth. Now, I want you to understand something as we read Jesus' teaching here. Jesus is not saying money is evil. In fact, he's not even telling all his disciples then and all his followers now to liquidize everything you have and give it away. That's not what he's saying. But what he wants this man to see is that right now the God of things and money sits on the throne of his soul. And Jesus knew he was going to have to dethrone that God in order for the God of heaven to take control of his life. And so I have this key idea on the screen because Jesus makes this connection between our eternal destiny or our spiritual condition and the things that we own. So take this thought home with you. How we handle and think about our money and possessions has a directly affects our spiritual condition. There is a powerful connection between our spiritual lives and our treasure and our resources and the things that we own. There are some theologians, some thinkers on this idea, they've termed it economic spirituality. They say that Jesus connects our spiritual condition to how we value our resources. We sometimes think they're separate and disconnected, but Jesus always shows us that they are connected. And so the question that I want to pose to you this morning that I want you to think about is, how can we grow a godly perspective of our things and our money and then use them for the kingdom of God? How can I have a more biblical Jesus view of the things that I own and let God shape my soul with those things and use them for his kingdom? So I have a few short answers I want to share with you this morning that come directly from this passage. I want to unpack this verse 21. And Jesus looked at him with love and he says, one thing you lack. And then he says these three simple words, underline them in your Bible: go sell everything. And so I have on the screen, simplify. That's all that Jesus was saying. He was saying, simplify. Because the truth is, we live very complex lives, don't we, because of our things and possessions. The truth is, I think most of us in the Southeast Valley live in some degree, to one degree or another, we live in excess. We live with more than enough. It's not like we don't have enough. Most of us have leftovers, and so we live in the excess. And Jesus is saying, simplify. You don't need so much. I think most of you know that I grew up as the son of missionaries. Missionaries are very cheap people, and missionaries tend to try to stretch their resources, especially if you're in another country. You value anything from America, even something as simple as ketchup. I really didn't think about that much till just a couple of years ago. Our church was helping to rebuild some buildings in Liberia at African Bible College after the Civil War. And we needed some ceiling tiles. And so I called my brother in Mississippi and I said, I think there's an Armstrong plant in Mississippi. Could you see if you could find someone there and maybe get us a discount on these Armstrong ceiling tiles? So he says, sure. So he calls around and he gets the regional vice president of Armstrong on the phone. And Paul says, he says, my name is Paul Chinchen. We're rebuilding this college in Africa. We need ceiling tiles. Can you help me get them at a discount? And the man says, you're Paul Chinchen? And he goes, yes, I'm Paul Chinchen. He said, Paul, you had dinner at my house when we were kids. And Paul says, really? You see, here's the thing. As missionary kids, every Sunday in America, you get dragged around to a different church, and you end up having lunch in different people's houses, thousands of them. I have no idea who I ate with as a kid. And Paul, the guy says, yes. He says, I'll never forget you guys having dinner at our house. He said, my mom made hamburgers and French fries. And he said, Paul, you cleaned your plate. You ate everything on your plate, but then you had a pile of ketchup left. He said, Paul, then you turned to your mom and you said, Mom, I need some more French fries so I can finish my ketchup. I think my brother was just hungry or something, but the guy says, you know what, I will never forget that you didn't even want to waste the ketchup. So I tell my kids about Paul Chinchen, the missionary kid in Africa, won't waste anything. And so you can't waste any food at our table. And he says, I try to live that way. And then he said, by the way, he says, we have so many ceiling tiles here. You can have as many as you want. You don't need to buy them. He filled literally a 20-foot shipping container of ceiling tiles that we took with us. Because maybe in one small way, he learned to live a little bit more simply. And so Jesus knows that none of us can grow spiritually if something else is consuming our heart. I want you to think about that. You know, it was a very simple, using that word here, challenge from Jesus, and it's this: who will have your heart? Will it be the God of things or the God in heaven? What do you value more? There's so many of the writers in Scripture address these issues. The writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews 13:5, we read, "Don't be obsessed with getting more material things. Be relaxed with what you have." How do you like that? This is Ecclesiastes. This is the wise King Solomon. He writes this: "God has made us plain and simple, but we have made ourselves very complicated." Do you know what happens when you start to live more simply? Do you know what happens when you let go of stuff and you start to live this dangerous life of generosity? One, life gets pretty frightening. The second thing is you have to depend on God more. And then if you start to give your stuff away, you step out into this adventure of life with God, where God, you just say, God, here's my life, use it. And my stuff, it doesn't matter as much as my walk with you. When I say that, I think about Kyle Ray. Now, most of you have gotten to know Kyle Ray now. He and his family have been at the Grove for about a year. And Kyle was just announcing our men's dinner next Sunday night. I've told some of you Kyle's story, but that was before he moved here. I think now you may understand it with new ears. But Kyle, when I first got to know him, we lived in Chicago, Illinois, in Wheaton, and he was in the young adult ministry I was in. And every time I spent time with Kyle just hanging out, he always complained about his job. Like, it wasn't his favorite job. He was doing geriatric workout routines at a retirement center. And he said it just wasn't that stimulating for him. And so we're having dinner one night, and he's moaning just a little bit about his job. So he's at my house, and I finally said, Kyle, you know what? You need to quit your job, and my dad over in Malawi needs an athletic director, and you need to move over there and lead their sports program. And Kyle said, that's a pretty good idea. He said, maybe I'll pray about it. And so when he left, my wife is really nice. She's one of the nicest people I know, and she doesn't get upset about much, but she was mad that night. She said, Palmer, you can't do that. You can't tell people to quit their job and move to Africa. She said, you're going to mess up somebody's life. I said, his life, is already suffocating him. He's like a caged bird, Veronica. And so he said, my dad actually, he taught a Bible study, and after that Bible study, he decided to move to Africa, and he quit his job. And then that summer, he was saving up for a ticket, but he had to buy the ticket with just like 2 or 3 weeks to go, and Kyle was short $500, so he called me on a Saturday morning. He said, Palmer, can you come help me with the garage sale? I'm putting everything I own on the front lawn. And I went over to his house. He rented it with several other guys. And literally, he was putting everything he owned on the front lawn for a garage sale, trying to raise $500. I thought, good luck with that. I've done garage sale. If you get $52, you're lucky. But so we take his bed out. Everything's for sale. His bed, his dresser, chairs, tables. We emptied out everything he owned in the house, and so then we went down to the basement, and we're carrying up desks and cabinets, and I said, wow, Kyle, this is a lot of stuff in the basement. Is this all yours? And he said, no, actually, it's my roommates, but they're at work right now, and they should make a donation to the cause. So we emptied out the basement. The best part is he needed literally $500. He got like $510 at the end of the day, and he bought the ticket. And then he moved to Africa, and then a couple of years later, he met a girl named Hilmarie, and he married her. And, I think there's a lesson buried in that. If you've ever been praying that you may meet your husband or your wife, my advice is sell everything you have, move to Africa, and then God God will take care of the rest of that. That has nothing to do with possessions. But do you see how using Kyle's life, you step into this adventure with God? You don't have much left, and so life, you just have to depend on him. And so I'll start with this line, go sell everything. Let's go back to Mark chapter 10, verse 21, and keep reading. We're just going to stick with this one verse today. And then Jesus says next, give the money to the poor. So you sell everything, now give it away. I think sometimes Christians give safely, I'll put it that way. Sometimes we give in our excess. Sometimes we only give out of what's left over after I pay the bills. What if I gave? What if we gave before we paid the bills? What if we began to share dangerously, so much so that it scared us? Have you ever given so much that it scared you? You weren't sure how God was going to meet your needs next? Most people haven't. I was having coffee with a pastor about a month ago, and his church had just started a campaign. And so he told me, he said, so I stood up in front of our church, and he said, I told them that my wife and I had committed to give over the next year $100,000. My jaw dropped. Maybe you don't know this. Pastors don't make a whole lot of money. And I was like, how are you going to do that? He said, Palmer, do you know what the kicker is? That was a month ago. In the last month, God has already given us more than half of that for us to give to the church. You know, I think God has this way of showing up when we share dangerously. Jesus, we read of this one instance in the book of Luke, chapter 12. He's sitting in the temple. And do you know where he puts himself on that day? He sits right by the giving box. It would be kind of weird. It'd be like one of our pastors sitting by the giving boxes out here just to see who's giving and what. And so he's making these observations. He's a participant observer, and he's sitting there. And then he turns to his disciples and he says, I've seen a lot of very affluent people give. He says, but they're just tipping God. Can I tell you what he says about this poor single widow who gives everything she has? This is Luke 21, verse 3. This poor widow has given more than all the rest of them, for they have given a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she has. That's what it means to give dangerously. Let's go to the next part of this verse and go back to verse 21, and we read, if we pick up, and you will have treasure in heaven. So he says, go sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. So Jesus points out always when he talks about these issues that there's two kinds of treasure. There's treasure on earth and there's treasure in heaven. He talks about there's a way to be rich towards yourself and there's a way to be rich towards God. Turn back in your Bibles a few pages to Matthew chapter 6 because Jesus shares his manifesto, his way to live in this world. It's the Sermon on the Mount. And he says this in verse 19. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasure in heaven, because where moths and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Did you catch those last words? They're extremely powerful words. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. His point is, be very careful what you treasure, because our hearts tend to follow our treasure. And sometimes we can end up spending a lifetime treasuring the wrong things. He says you can treasure things and money, or you can treasure your relationship with God. You can treasure eternal things. You can treasure your children and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your wife and your husband. We sometimes, I think, let other people around us determine for us what should be our treasure. Let's be honest. We let our conversations with friends put more value on physical possessions than on our spirituality. That happens just by the influence of people around us. I've seen that most of my life. I remember in college, there was a guy on our floor. His name was Todd. Todd was one of the funniest guys I knew. Anyway, he wanted a stereo system that was loud, and so he went to admissions and records, and he dropped a class. And I didn't know this. I don't know how Todd knew this, but when you dropped a class at Biola, they refunded you cash money. For his dad had paid the bill, but he got cash money back. And he went down to Best Buy or somewhere, and he bought the biggest stereo he could get for like $500. He sets it up in his room, and he cranks it. And he's calling us all in there to come listen to it. And he's saying, guys, it's 1,000 watts. Can you hear it? It's 1,000 watts. You have to be a guy in a dorm to really appreciate this. It was loud. But we all turned, we said, Todd, what did Al say? Al, because among groups of guys, there's always the one guy that knows his sound systems, and unless he blesses it and says it really is worth the money, it's not worth a cent. So we go find Al, and the thing's still blaring, and Al walks in the room, and Todd's going, Al, it's 1,000 watts. Al, what do you think? And Al's listening. Just for like half a minute, he looks up and he goes, yeah, Todd, it's 1,000 watts of hiss. That's what he said. He said, I don't know, it's a hiss. Todd walks over, I'm not kidding you, he unplugs it, picks it up, connects the speakers, puts them back in the box, and takes it back to Best Buy. Because Al had not blessed it. Al said, that's not what, you need something more expensive, better than that. We let people around us all the time determine what our treasure should be. If I ask you the question, what do you treasure most in life right now? What would you say? There's a writer who last century wrote so many great things about God and our walk with him. He used to ask he used to ask 4 questions about what do we treasure most. His name's A.W. Tozer. Here's the questions he would ask. He would ask, what do you value most? And then he would ask this, what would you most hate to lose? What do your thoughts turn to when you're free to think about whatever you wish? And then he asks, what gives you the most pleasure? He says, your answer to these questions lets you know what you treasure most. I hope your answer to those questions are something like my kids or my wife, my husband, my friendships, my relationship with Jesus Christ. I hope somewhere in there is my church. There's so many things that have eternal value, and sometimes we treasure most the things, Jesus' point is, that don't matter a cent when you look at when you look at life as a whole. Jesus says this in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. If you're wondering where your treasure is going, or if you wonder where your heart is going, then follow the money. Look at your bank receipts and your income and your expenses. Those records print out every month. You can actually look at them online, and sometimes they tell you where your heart is. Finally, the last part of this phrase that I wanted to look at in verse 21 is this. Jesus says, then come and follow me. So Jesus is saying, let go. And in my Bible, I've circled, in my notes, I've bolded the word then. And we just have it here. And in your Bible, underline the word then, because Jesus' point is, after you let it all go, and when you let it all go, when it doesn't mean so much, then you can really follow me. Do you see how tightly our things can or cannot be connected to our spiritual condition? So Jesus says, when you let it go, then you can follow me. I think the struggle for every human being is to let go. Sometimes I end up watching this show called American Pickers. And the people where they stop when they're van, they're just stopping to visit hoarders. But then I realized every town in America has hoarders. In fact, many of you here are hoarders. You just don't call it that. You call it your garage. You call it your closet. The truth is, most of us by nature, we hold on to things that aren't worth a whole lot. Watch children sometimes. Kids don't hold on so tightly. I know that because I saw this Diamondbacks clip that I had to show to you. It's just 50 seconds long. Watch this with me. About two kids.
Sitting in the crowd of thousands at the Arizona Diamondbacks game, a 12-year-old boy watching the game, about to do something that would catch not only their eyes in the announcer's booth, but ours too. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It was the fourth inning. A player tosses a ball into the stands. Two little boys wanted it, but only Ian McMillan would get it.
Oh, look at that young Brewers fan. Now, wait a minute. Did he get?
No.
Oh, boy.
He is sour. He is sour. The Diamondback fan got it.
The announcers watching with their own play-by-play.
Oh, he's bummed
Are
out.
you kidding me? This kid's going to do this?
Oh, yeah. That is big time.
Oh, my
right
goodness.
there. What a nice young man.
Well, he's got a Diamondbacks hat, but we have to get something for that kid in the red. I can't believe I just witnessed that.
That is
just
awesome.
Young man, are a star.
Men are awesome.
How do you like that? Yeah, let's applaud that. I love that he says, "You, young man, are a star." There's a couple of lessons, I think, there. The first one is that Diamondback fans are quicker and faster and more agile than Brewers fans. I mean, that's just obvious. But so do you know why kids let go of things more easily than adults? Because they know their mother and their father can always give them more. They know that. So they let go. And as adults, we hold on so tightly and we think our Father in heaven cannot give us more. By the way, after the first service, a man came up and he said, "I know the family. I know Ian's family well." He said the Diamondbacks called him up. And in fact, they called him to the dugout, he and his buddy, and they gave both of them autograph balls. You see, your Father in heaven can do that for you. We think we're holding on to treasure. And he says, no, there's something better. And so I guess my invitation to you this morning is just to hold on a little bit more loosely and start letting go. We read that, if you read verse 22, we read next that at this the man's face fell and he went away sad. I think sometimes we think holding on to things will make us happier, and he has everything, and it still doesn't bring the contentment that his soul longs for. So my challenge to you is pretty simple. A lot of us here, a lot of you have financial goals in life, right? I want to challenge you to make your number one financial goal this: to be more generous. If you've ever had financial goals, put this one at the top of all of them: to live more generously. And if maybe you haven't been good at giving to church or to God's work or sharing, can I challenge you to start today? It starts with today giving. And then it starts by making that a habit where every week you live generously, whether it's coming to church and giving or through your relationships and friendships, you're living more generously. That's my challenge. Because you've stepped into a culture that the only way I can describe it is a culture of extreme generosity.